This podcast, if you don't know, is available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And as a reminder to listeners, this podcast series is a volunteer effort with no financial incentives for anyone. So hitting the subscribe button helps to raise the profile of the series and helps you so you don't miss an episode. Welcome to the Community Music Learning IJCM Conversations series. My name is Roger Mantie, and together with Alicia Banfi Hall, I'm hosting this series. We are here today with Dave Camlin, lecturer in music education at Trinity-Laban and the Royal College of Music, and a former head of higher education and research at Sage Gateshead. Dave, welcome.
Hi, Roger. Good to see you.
Yes, likewise. So, listen, in preparing for today, I was thinking back to when I first met you. I could be wrong, but I believe it was at the Community Music Activity Commission in 2016 in Edinburgh.
Yeah, no, that's probably right, actually.
Yeah. I knew about you before that.
days.
Yes, well, yeah, exactly. Good times. And I remember the wall, the Hadrian's Wall trip
Yeah.
and everything else. So I've been following your academic career ever since your time as a graduate student. But I confess I do not know a lot about your pre-academic period when you worked primarily as a performing musician and a community musician and so on. Can you talk a little bit about that as well as your motivations to pursue academic life?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of fell into community music, really. So I grew up in West Cumbria, which is where I'm at the minute, where I'm from, where all my family are from, and moved away and was a gigging musician around the Midlands and in the UK. And then when I hit 30, I kind of decided with my wife we wanted to settle down somewhere, and we kind of thought, well, actually, the best place to head is probably somewhere that you know. So we kind of came back, and I live in this beautiful part of the world, full of lakes and mountains. Not the best place necessarily to start a career, or to follow up a career in music. But I've kind of formed bands and was kind of a gigging musician, and then me and a fiddle player got into electronic music and were touring that for a while, and we got asked to come into schools and support young people developing their kind of band capabilities. So we kind of had those kind of rock and pop and electronic chops at the time. So that was kind of how we fell into it, really. And somebody that commissioned us to do some work for a local council said, "Oh, there's a conference going on at Liverpool Institute of Performing Arts about community music. You should go to that." And we were like, "Why? What's community music?" And they said, "Well, that's what you do." We were like, "Oh, really? Is that what you call it?" Okay, we didn't know we were community musicians
Right. Mm-hmm.
at all. And then I got involved with Sage Gateshead because we were delivering all of this band work in our communities. And Sage Gateshead in 2000, when it started, had funds to build the workforce. So it had aspirations. At the time, it had an orchestra within it with 140 musicians in, and it had aspirations when it set it out on its artistic mission to have an equal number of participatory musicians to lead its learning and participation programs. Mm-hmm. So we got involved with that at the start, and then immediately that became a development program for musicians to be able to do the kind of work that we were doing. And I found myself with some responsibilities for that training program. Then we developed a partnership with a local University of Sunderland, and we set up the world's first, well, certainly the UK's first degree in community music. So I ended up being responsible for higher education and research and running this degree in community music and a degree in jazz, and realised that I didn't feel particularly qualified to be doing that. I didn't have any musical qualifications. I was self-taught as a musician. So at that point, I put myself through a doctorate, a professional doctorate, a D.Prof, and used the experience of Sage Gateshead as a research site to understand actually what does it mean to be a musician who's developing their skills within an organisation that thinks about its programme, its artistic programme, as equally performance and participation. And that kind of gave rise to all of the ideas in my doctorate. And it's really kind of been the grounding for all of my research since then, which has been trying to reconcile what have become a bit dichotomous in our world of performance discipline and participatory music as quite separate entities, and I've just never thought that there's a good reason for doing that.
Right. Well, thanks for sharing that, because it is wonderful to hear the backstory. Can't speak for all listeners, but I'm very familiar with your published scholarship. And for those who have not yet checked it out, I highly recommend your book, Music and the Civic Imaginations. It's just, congratulations. It's an amazing work.
Plug.
Yeah, there you go. Yes, absolutely. But this podcast is, because it's the IJCM Conversations series, is about the journal. So I want to ask you in a minute about the special issue on sustainability that you just guest edited. But first, I'd like to ask you about your own articles. So you've got a couple of articles in the journal. One is called This Is My Truth, Tell Me Yours, published in 2015, I think. And then Capturing the Magic in 2020, which you co-authored with Laura Caulfield and Rosie Perkins. Can you speak a little bit about those two articles? What gave rise to them? What are they about? Go ahead.
And the thread between both of those articles actually is to do with dialogue as a practice and as a pedagogy. This Is My Truth, Tell Me Yours actually came out of a recognition in the course that we were teaching on community music that everybody thinks they invented community music. One of the students doing the course said to me, like, part of the way, maybe 3/4 of the way through the first year, he said, "Dave, you've brought in some brilliant guest lecturers to talk about community music, but every one of them that's come in tells us they're convinced that they invented community music. How can it be? Who actually invented community music?" And so we had some great discussions around that, and made the point that actually, in a way, everybody does invent community music, because it's always about individual musicians and the communities that they work with in very different situations, doing what they do because of those situations. So and that means that in order to understand community music, we have to understand it from a dialogic perspective, that it isn't one fixed thing, that we have to recognise that it's actually an ongoing conversation between musicians about what it is, and between people, between participants as well. Lots of people get involved in community music, don't necessarily think it's community music. So I think there was a philosophical piece, and I think trying to introduce this idea of dissensus as well, as a way of understanding, because I think for a lot of the students that we had doing the community music undergrad program, they tended to feel fraudulent, because they'd see people doing this work and they judge themselves by what other people were doing and go, actually, you know what, I'm quite quiet. I'm not the kind of person to stand in front of groups waving my arms about and being all charismatic. That's not me. Or they'd go, well, actually, I don't read music, or I only read music. I feel panicky when people expect me to do something without music. So how can I be this versatile musician? So the point that we made with that program was essentially it starts with you to join the dialogue, to be part of community music. You have to understand what motivates you as a musician, and that's why that's about This Is My Truth, Now Tell Me Yours. It's about, there is no single way of understanding this. It's about you working out for yourself what makes sense for you in your situation and for you as a musician. And then I also think it was to emphasise that notion of dialogic pedagogy as well. That actually, to be able to do this work means you need to be able to listen to people in a deep way. You need to understand what kind of things, what kind of motivations do people have for being there in the first place? What kind of aspirations do people have for what the music wants to do with them, for them, So it's about understanding that, not coming into it with an idea that we're going to do this and I have all the answers. It's about understanding who's in the room, what are their motivations, what are their aspirations, how do we work together on all of these things. And I think, and we tried to make sure that was threaded through the undergrad program, because I think I make the point in that article that you can't really teach in a dialogic way unless you've experienced it, unless you've been on the receiving end of it. If you've had a teacher who's taken interest in you and what motivates you, it opens your mind a bit to that way of working. And I think that approach to pedagogy is for me is what's at the heart of community music.
Yeah, yeah.
And then in that second article, Capturing the Magic, we took that idea of dialogue a stage further. I'm really proud of that article because what it came off the back of the MuseOc network, which was a network that Jenny Henley and Lee Higgins had set up to discuss themes of excellence and inclusion in music and community music. And we were grouped into teams of people. So there's me and Rosie Perkins and Laura Caulfield, given the task of, okay, so write up what your impressions of what this network's been about. And we realised that actually, as we were talking about how we might write an article, we realised that actually this conversation, this is the knowledge.
Right.
So actually, the conversations that practitioners, that researchers, that people have with each other about the issues that we face, that's where knowledge is generated. So we thought, actually, how can we get as close as we can to the source of the knowledge as a dialogue between people who engaged in similar kinds of work. So we approached that from the point of view of, let's not prefigure it too much. Let's just come with some ideas around how do we measure, or how do we capture, or how do we understand the impact. And we had a conversation. We recorded the conversation, and then the only thing we did afterwards is we added in. So if you were watching the conversation, you'd see three people talking, but if you could see our minds, there are three people talking, but are also having like ideas flying off and kind of making connections to things that we've read and things that we've been involved in as researchers. So we permitted ourselves to go back into the dialogue afterwards and add in references to the things that we were drawing on.
Of course. Well, and that's the advantage of the sort of textual form, is that, it as more of an asynchronous kind of process, you have that opportunity to fill in the blanks that you can't necessarily do in a more sort of in the moment dialogue kind of approach. No, that's absolutely fabulous, and again, the fact that you modeled the very thing that we are so often talking about, I think, is really powerful.
And I think that's, if there's something to take forward for people from that, I think it's kind of recognising that knowledge of community music comes in all different shapes and sizes, and I think it's worth thinking about actually where is the knowledge actually held, and how do we get close to that as the way that we report on it, the way that we research on it, rather than trying to feel like we need to squash ourselves into prefigured ideas around what knowledge looks like.
Well, speaking of kind of different forms of knowledge and whatnot, the main thing that I wanted to talk with you about today is the recent special issue that you guest edited on music making and sustainable futures. So moving from the dialogic into the sustainable, and I do want to ask you about the content in a minute, but first I wanted to ask you about your own experience in the role of guest editor, and as someone who has guest edited myself, I know firsthand that it's not for the faint of heart, let's say. So can you talk a little bit about your motivation for doing it, and then, of course, what the experience was like, and maybe perhaps with that, if you might have any advice for anyone else thinking about proposing a special issue for the journal.
Well, my motivations, I think, were fairly straightforward. I mean, there were a few. It wasn't just me that kind of set up the call. There was a few of us that were thinking around these ideas. But it was really recognising that there's. I mean, for me in my research, where it's taking me is towards asking questions about what is my practice, what is my music, what is anything that I'm doing as a human being actually contributing to some of the ecological crises that we face. So the book that you mentioned, Music Making and Civic Imagination, that's kind of my attempt to explore how music making might be seen as a potential resource for sustainability, for imagining better or alternative worlds to the ones that we live in. So and the motivation really for the special issue was thinking, I'm just curious to know who else might be thinking along similar lines. I think I mean I've been asked to write chapters for a few things. It feels like there's an emerging ecological turn happening within music education generally, and I think that's absolutely right that it should be happening, because I think unless we're using what we do to address ecological issues, we can't really be certain that we're not part of the problem of at least of complacency. But it was really to try and understand actually how do other people think about some of these questions about sustainability, not just sustainability of projects, but tapping into a bit broader ideas of sustainability, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or even beyond ideas of sustainable development. If we don't want to think about growth in economic terms, what does sustainability look like in those contexts? And are there other musicians around the world who are thinking about their music making and their community music in those terms? And it was an absolute delight to see that there really are, and in very, very diverse ways. I mean, I'm really proud of that special issue, because I think it draws together so many different perspectives from
and if I can interrupt there and just sort of say, so basically you had this idea and it was just fabulous about sustainability, and you just put out a call, and then a bunch of articles came in, and then you just published them.
Yes, if only it were that simple. Yeah. No, so obviously there's the journal's systems are geared up to for peer review. So obviously the great big sequence that you're kind of omitting to mention there, Roger, is that there's a whole process of peer review that goes on, which is for as a guest editor, that's about kind of thinking about which people that you know, or which people that whose work you're familiar with might be interested in something that someone else has written on a subject, and getting a group of people together who are interested in those things. And the process of peer review is not straightforward. I mean, for me, I think it was made trickier, if I'm honest, by the fact that we weren't able to use people from the existing IJCM editorial board, so we're having to look outside of that board. So in terms of kind of making sure that we're meeting the quality standards that's expected of the journal, there's quite a lot of pressure on there, because you as the guest editor, you're kind of aware that the book almost stops with you.
That's right, yes.
But it doesn't actually stop with you, because it actually stops with you, Roger.
Well, yes, I know. But the nice thing from your experience, though, is like whenever you sent things out or asked for turnaround, I mean, my understanding is people were basically responding in 2 or 3 days, right?
I think for the most part. Yes. It's, in fairness, yes. Some people, some researchers, some peers are very, very good at responding in a timely way to requests for peer review, and it's fair to say some people are not so.
People are busy, right? People are busy.
Yeah. And absolutely.
It's and I think that's not to be critical of anyone, but just to acknowledge for listeners who maybe have less direct knowledge or experience with the process. Everyone is extremely busy, and this is just number 400 on their priority list. And while it's important, there's only so many hours in the day. And so I think sometimes, especially maybe less experienced authors, they sometimes don't understand how, they've written it, they submitted it, why isn't it published like next week? And they don't understand why it might take 6 or 8 months or longer sometimes for things to finally appear in print. Right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
So.
And actually, my experience of that whole process, it was probably about 18 months, I think, between the call going out and the edition going to press. It felt very much like there's that small team of us, kind of we're all spinning many other plates, and every so often someone will come back and spin this particular plate, and we'll go, oh yeah, we need to all be here again. So I think it's on top of a busy life. It's quite a big ask. But it was really rewarding.
Well, yes, I would say that that's the payoff. And maybe can you talk about that? I mean, this issue was really quite stunning. Such fabulous contributions. Do you want to just, you want anything you want to talk about in there of the various contributions?
I mean, I think I encourage people to go, to have a look at the whole of it, because I think it's really diverse. But I think the contributions take it in lots of really interesting ways. I mean, actually, my copy of it landed on my
Nice
on my through my letterbox just literally 2 days ago. So there are a few things in it. So that I'll some highlights. I think Sarah Jane Gibson in her article, which is called "Considering Approaches Towards Sustainability Through Reflexive Ethnographic Research," she introduces the idea of sustain, maintain, or sustain change as a really key way of thinking about sustainability. And I think that was the issue. One of the issues we really were trying to understand was we want to try and get past the idea of project sustainability in community music, because that's around all the time. How do we keep going? How do we get more funds to do this and that? And thinking about what does sustainability mean in terms of changing practices. And she was using the focus of ethno projects, this international music project, looking at two particular examples of practice within that network and looking at how they're responding differently to sustainability. Mm-hmm. There are two articles in here from Colombia, and I've been lucky enough to spend a little bit of time in Colombia a couple of years ago to give a keynote at Bogota. But my first encounters with the Colombian what we would call them fellowship community around Sonido Colectivo was some of them were involved in the SIM project, so led by Barbican Guildhall. So they were over for one of the SIM conferences, and it really struck me what an incredibly valuable contribution the knowledge that's coming out of this particular situation is, in terms of all the things that are going on. It's post-colonial, it's post-conflict, it's not even post-conflict. It's really complex place, and the work that was coming out of Sonido Collectiva, this collective of sound. That's a number of musicians who are working across community music and higher education and research contexts, is absolutely inspiring. And in particular, one of them that's reported here, that the Tambores de Siloé project, that's Ian Middleton and Moses Zambora and Alexandra Patino, is a wonderful example of a really engaged approach to working with young people, children and young people in very challenging circumstances, and seeing what impact and what meaning music has for people in those kind of contexts. Mm-hmm. The other one that came out of a South American context was this wonderful one that Kristen Graves had written about music making on and with a rubbish dump in Mexico. So the Los Pepes, this group of workers who work the dump, creating a corridor, like a song to celebrate and commemorate their work in this place. And it's deep longitudinal work that's been done. But what I love about it is the post-human aspect of it, that the music that is being made in this particular context, firstly, is being made with rubbish materials, with refuse. So the rubbish itself has agency. And that's made even deeper in terms of sustainability by the fact that it's rubbish that's singing, that's making music. Mm-hmm. So I think that article hopefully just takes us into a very different territory of what the potentials are for community music, of thinking about what other materials might be involved in music making, and how might those other materials have something to say about sustainability. So I really hope that article in particular will inspire people to think about how that might apply in their context, what other materials might be implicated within community music.
Yeah.
Fiona Everson's article, I think, is wonderful as well, but more from the point of view of being a composer within community music context, responding to place, and actually a few articles in there responding to place as well. There's an article, Songsy Towers article as well, is about ideas about place, but in a diaspora of people that are reconnecting to a sense of home through online music making. And then the final article in the series is one which is exploring the experience of students coming into the work and understanding how they make sense of the complexity of this kind of work. So I like the fact that the special issue has some very philosophical points to it, has something to say about musician education, but also has some quite radical things to say as well. I think about materiality, about the ways that people can change the world within their reach as part of a way of changing the world more generally.
Yeah. Well, I'll say that maybe if I can make an observation, one of my sort of personal maybe it's a little bit dated, but sort of my little remorses is just that now in our digital world, we so often think in terms of articles rather than in terms of journal issues. You know, like everything is just a one-off, and it almost sometimes doesn't matter where it comes from. And I think in the old days of print, not to sound so old-fashioned, but it was like a book, right? Every issue, and you had the physical issue that you held up there, and as a result, you had this experience of something that had a kind of coherence across it, and obviously a special issue is a special example of that, but I think what's so powerful in my reading of it is the integrity of it as an issue from front to back. And, shout out to Intellect for their ongoing support of publishing color images, for example, which I think, are always powerful. But in this issue, I think are particularly powerful. Yeah. So anybody who's watching on YouTube, Dave's holding this up, and I mean that's just incredible. So it really adds a ton of value, and I really strongly encourage listeners to check out the issue. It's just an amazing accomplishment. Oh yeah, there's another one. Like it makes it so real, and you just. It conveys so much. I mean, not to be cliched about a picture being a 1,000 words, but it is powerful. So listen, we're almost out of time here today, but I did want to ask you one, we always like to ask our guests sort of a closing question. And in the beginning, you alluded to University of Sunderland and, the first example of a degree in community music and whatnot. And so I sort of feel like, earlier you discussed who invented, community music or the term. That's maybe one thing. But then when we talk about the academic field of community music or the professionalization of community music, it sounds to me like you are one of the people really instrumental in contributing to that. I mean, maybe guilty of that if I want to. So we've got an issue coming up, a special issue called, I wanted to put you on the hot seat. We got an issue called Thinking More About Community Music coming up, a special issue for 2026. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts, because I know it's always sort of a perennial hot potato in the world of community music, this sort of academic or professionalization kind of issue. Any thoughts you want to offer on that?
Well, I think for me, what's interesting is when we started the community music undergrad program at Sage Gateshead, there wasn't really anywhere else you could study community music, certainly in the UK, at undergrad level. There were master's programs, but in terms of an undergrad program in community music, there wasn't really anywhere else. Whereas now, I think you would be hard pressed to find any institution in higher education in the UK doing music that didn't have community music, at least as a module within it. So I think community music has become ubiquitous. It's worked its way into the academy, but I also think something's been lost. I mean, that program closed, by the way, and I think that's because community music has kind of become ubiquitous. But I think what's been lost in the process of that is the loss of a way of developing knowledge and skills as community musicians that is bound up in the practice itself. So I think increasingly the risk for me is that community music becomes an adjunct to something rather than something that deserves study in and of itself. And I think that the professionalization of community music has moved it into this sphere, but it means that not always. I think when we were setting up that community music program, and for me, becoming a community musician was about making it up. You know, you might go and see other people that were doing similar things and get some ideas from them, but you kind of had to work it out for yourself. Whereas now, I think community music becoming part of the curriculum means the risk is that it becomes a method rather than a philosophy, if that kind of makes sense.
Oh yes.
I'm kind of. I think initially I was really excited when you kind of say, "Oh wow, community music's getting into everywhere," but the version of community music that thrives in the academy is not necessarily the same version that develops within communities as part of an organic process of people working out how to use music to bring something into their communities. So I think that's something that community music as a field is going to have to grapple with for a long time yet. And I'm really excited about what's going to come out of that special issue. I've put an expression of interest in for that one.
And I think it's fabulous that you're going to be hopefully a part of that, assuming you submit the manuscript and we'll get it peer reviewed and everything else, part of this academic process. But thank you for your thoughts on professionalization, because of course I, like you, I sit with this constant tension and not unease or dis-ease, but just this ethical tension as I'm about to leave in a few minutes to go teach my class called Introduction to Community Music. And, can I model the very principles that you were referencing now and earlier in the podcast? So, Dave, thank you so much. Thank you for being here and sharing all your thoughts and all of your ongoing work in the field of community music. And thank you to all listeners of this podcast. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and we will hopefully see you or have you listen to our next issue or episode of the IJCM Conversations podcast series. Thanks.
I want to thank our amazing production team, and that includes Laurie Hall, Anu Aldenhoff, and Gabriel Vincent.